Well, as we come to the end of this week's conversation, I hope it's been helpful. I've enjoyed sharing with you. I really consider it the greatest honor that you take any time at all to listen to my bloviating. But I was just thinking, yesterday I talked about doing things, or a few days ago about doing things with sincerity of heart. And I remember somebody said one time that sincerity is the most important thing. And then they added, when you learn how to fake that, you've got it made. And I think we live in a kind of world where people fake sincerity a lot of times. It's a very narcissistic, sociopathic personality behavior where you pretend to like people so you can manipulate them to do what you want them to do. And as soon as they don't please you or you don't need them, you just cast them away. That's increasingly becoming a pattern. I think we see it in government, we see it in the military. I think about hospitals that are firing employees who faithfully served, sacrificially and dangerously served during the beginning of the COVID epidemic, and now are being let go because they don't want to take the vaccine, most of them because they have natural immunity. They caught it, they went through it, and they really don't need the shot, and yet they're being let go because they won't take it. It's one of those funny things. I just heard from a friend of mine in Israel who he's been triple vaxxed. He's had COVID twice, and now he's gotten it the second time. So it's just like you look at that and go, so what is the advantage of getting all these vaccinations? Well, I don't judge anybody for getting it. I just don't understand why we have employees being fired because they aren't getting it. But I'll let you work that one out. You know what I think about that, so I better stop there. But what I really want to look at is the last thing here, where he says in verse 9 that masters, treat your slaves in the same way. In other words, if you're the boss and you're in charge, you should treat people with the same kind of respect, the same kind of sincerity, the same kind of concern. It's basically doing to others what you would have done with them. That you don't see yourself as in a higher position because you're a better person than they are. You hopefully have more skill and experience and can do your job more effectively because of those things, but you don't diminish the value of other people who are just beginning that journey. You see the worth in the long-range investment in their development and their skills. So he says you just need to treat them the same way. And he says again, don't threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Again, the issue of favoritism, God doesn't look at one person and like another person better than that person. And I say that even though that may be an obvious truth, but for many of us, we don't believe that's true about us. Not that we see ourselves better than other people, although some do, but most people I talk to see themselves as being less. They tend to diminish themselves. They're not on the narcissistic side of the scale. They're on the codependent side of the scale, where they just don't think they're worthy of being loved, cared for, and valued by other people. And so when they are devalued, they accept it, not because they're being spiritual or being virtuous. They're doing it because they don't believe that they deserve to be treated right. And that's one of those things, even in a marriage relationship, that my wife understands that the Bible says I'm the head of my family and I need to operate in that leadership role. But that doesn't make me better than my wife. It doesn't mean that she has less value than I have. In fact, one of the things any honest man would recognize, his wife probably is smarter and better at a whole lot of things than you are. I shudder to think, my wife and I actually have this conversation. What happens if one of us passes away? And she's going to be heartbroken and I'm going to be destitute. There's a difference there. I mean, she's going to miss me, but she's pretty good at managing her life. Me, I don't know where anything is. After all these years of marriage, I still have to ask her, where does this go? Because that's not me. Anyway, and I would probably die of starvation because, there's only so many microwave meals you can live on. So the whole point is that we need to understand that God does not have a favorite. We joke sometimes about people who are especially blessed or seem to us to be especially blessed. They're God's favorite. But the truth of the matter is, you are God's favorite. That his eyes are on you continually, just like the song says, as his eyes are on the sparrow, so his eyes are always on me. That I have this intrinsic value just because I'm his child. I was made in his image. I was created for his purpose. And so he values me as an integral part. He says that every one of us has an individual part of the body of Christ that's irreplaceable. There's not two of you anywhere. And there's not just anybody can do what you do. I know that we have like these job descriptions for all of those people who work at our church. Everyone has their own individual job description, but their job and what they do is far greater than what's written down in that description. Because many of them, I'm so respect them because they take initiative to address problems that really may not be their responsibility. It's the kind of thing, using myself as a little bit of an example, but I quite often, if I'm walking around the church or outside the church and there's garbage or cigarette butts and things that are left on the sidewalk, I pick them up and throw them away. I don't feel like I need to wait for or call somebody from maintenance to come and take care of this problem. It's in front of me. I can save them a lot of time and effort. If I can do it myself and rid the problem, more to it. Same way when we talk about technical issues. If I can figure out how to make my stuff work right and don't have to bother some of our IT people, well, more blessing there, because they also have a load of work to do. And to some degree, because they take so much initiative to address the problems and difficulties and situations that arise as part of living in a broken and fallen world. So all this to say that as you rise in a role of responsibility, never forget that part of your responsibility as a leader is to the people that you're leading. There's a saying, Simon Sinek, not a Christian, but he wrote a book, Leaders Eat Last. And he talks about how in the Marine Corps, in their companies, basically, the commanding officer never eats until all of his men have eaten. I was watching this Iditarod race on TV last night. Fascinating. I was really amazed by what goes into that. But here is this guy who's driving mushing this bunch of 10 dogs across the 1,000 miles of Alaska snow, and every time he settles down, the first thing he does is make a bedding for his dogs and then feeds his dog, and then he takes care of his needs last. And I thought, what an example of leadership, that we look to not our own needs first, but we look to the needs of those whom we are responsible for. Now, I'm not responsible for everybody because I can't be every place and I don't have everything and I'm not able to do everything. But I know that there are people that God has put in my sphere of relationships, and I am responsible to care for them, whether it's your wife, your kids, your co-workers, those who work under you. And that's why especially it says, you who are in charge, don't look at these people as simply drones that you've hired to carry out a task. Value them for the precious resource that they are, and invest in them. And they will reward you, because ultimately, not only will they work harder, more honestly and faithfully for you, but also God will recognize that, and He will reward and honor you. The one thing He says you shouldn't do is you shouldn't threaten them. Now, threatening is not the same as holding people accountable. That we have to hold an employee accountable for their performance. And it happens from time to time. Some people, whether they know how to work or just aren't motivated for whatever reason, need to be held accountable. You need to sit down and say, look, here's your job, here's the production that is normal and reasonable and expected of you, and you're not doing that. And people who show up late perpetually, or who call in sick on an ongoing basis when it's questionable whether they really are, and so forth. All those kind of dynamics are the frustrations that come to people in leadership, because no matter how high your level of leadership, there's somebody higher than you. Even the President of the United States is ultimately responsible to the citizens of that country, and if he can't perform his job adequately, he will probably be voted out of office and viewed with a great deal of disrespect, unfortunately. But the simple fact is, he says, don't use threats to try to coerce people. I've found that when people are motivated and have initiative, you don't have to push them. There are some people who are just, the book of Proverbs talks about the lazy, slothful man. There's some people who are just lazy and slothful. And the reasons for that are their own, and we can try to help them as best we can. But at the end of the day, if a person will not do their job, then they need to be dismissed. That's just the long and the short of it. So, but at the same time, it's not personal. You really hope for the best and give them every opportunity. But again, we don't threaten people and say, if you don't do this, then I'm going to do that. And I think that whether we're talking about family, we're talking about business, whether we're talking about government, anytime that threats are used to coerce the government, something has been turned upside down, and the order of importance has shifted and flipped on its head, and needs to be repented of. Well, again, out of time. It's been a good week, and I'll look forward to continuing on as we look at verse 10 in chapter 6 and start out in a whole new adventure. God bless you. Go in His grace.